A soldier falls during the changing of the guard. Watch what happens next. The midday sun blazed over Buckingham Palace, transforming the historic landmark into a heat-reflecting furnace. The grand iron gates, adorned with the royal coat of arms, shimmered under the relentless rays. Even the stone walls, standing for centuries, seemed to radiate an unbearable warmth. It was one of the hottest days recorded in London that year. The normally cool and overcast British climate had been overtaken by a rare heat wave, pushing temperatures well past 36 degrees Celsius, 97 degrees Fahrenheit. Yet, despite the sweltering heat, the courtyard was packed with tourists, some waving handheld fans, others shielding themselves with umbrellas, desperately seeking any bit of shade. But one thing remained unchanged. The Royal Guard stood firm, their legendary discipline on full display. Among them was Private James Turner, positioned in the front row of his squad. Standing at full attention, his rifle gripped tightly, and his bearskin hat towering over his head, James was the epitome of a British soldier's strength and resilience. But today, he felt something different. His uniform, normally a source of pride, now felt like a suffocating prison. The thick wool fabric trapped the heat, refusing to let his body breathe. And the bearskin hat, almost 9 pounds in weight, felt like a furnace, its black fur absorbing every ounce of sunlight. Even as beads of sweat dripped down his back, soaking into his tunic, James stood tall. Because that was his duty. To never move. To never break formation. To uphold the honor of the Royal Guard, no matter what. But as the heat intensified, something deep inside him began to waver. He forced himself to focus. To listen. To drown out the sun's intensity with the familiar sounds of the courtyard, the murmuring tourists, the rhythmic clicking of cameras, the occasional distant bell chime from Westminster. But today, even those sounds felt distant. And in just a few moments, the unthinkable would happen. James had endured grueling training to stand motionless for hours. He had been taught to resist distractions, ignore discomfort, and maintain composure no matter what. But nothing in his training had prepared him for this level of heat. With each passing second, his body screamed for relief. His breath quickened, his chest rising and falling faster than usual. His skin felt like it was burning beneath his uniform, each layer of fabric clinging to him like a heated blanket. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, a steady, relentless drumbeat against his skull. And then, the warning signs began. His vision blurred slightly, as if he were looking through a fogged-up window. His knees, locked in position for well over an hour, began to feel strangely heavy. His hands, tightly gripping his rifle, tingled slightly, a subtle sign that his circulation was being affected. Still, he forced himself to endure it. This was just another test of his resilience, right? The thought kept him going. But his body? His body was failing him. Somewhere in the sea of tourists, a young woman was the first to notice something was wrong. "Look at that guard," she whispered to her friend. Others slowly began to see it too. James' posture, usually rigid and immovable, was beginning to falter. His knees twitched slightly. His shoulders sagged just a fraction of an inch. And then, a single drop of sweat rolled down from his forehead, disappearing beneath the brim of his hat. The crowd held their breath. Was he about to? James blinked, trying to shake off the dizziness. But it was too late. His legs wobbled. His rifle slipped slightly in his grip. And then, With a sudden sway, his body gave in. His knees buckled. And in front of hundreds of tourists, cameras rolling, Private James Turner collapsed. For a moment, everything was silent. The usual buzz of the crowd had vanished. It was as if the entire courtyard was frozen in time. Then, gasps erupted. People pointed in shock, their faces shifting from surprise to deep concern. "Did he just faint?" someone whispered. "Oh my God! Is he okay?" another tourist gasped, gripping her friend's arm. Dozens of phones lifted into the air, recording what had just happened. A royal guard, the embodiment of British discipline and endurance, had collapsed in front of Buckingham Palace. And yet, the other guards didn't move. Not a single one. They stood, stone-faced and unwavering, gripping their rifles, their eyes fixed forward. To the untrained eye, it seemed cold and unfeeling. Why weren't they helping him? Why were they just standing there? But in reality, this was protocol. The Royal Guards are trained for this exact situation. They knew help was already on the way. And just as expected, a single guard stepped forward. Not in panic. Not in haste. But with absolute precision. Every movement was controlled, every action calculated. He approached James' fallen form, checking his breathing and pulse. Then, two more guards joined him, lifting the unconscious soldier without disrupting the ceremony. There was no chaos. No frantic movements. No loss of composure. It was effortless. Practiced. Perfect. And as James was carried away, the rest of the guards held their positions, standing as they always had, immovable, disciplined, unshaken. The tourists who had initially been shocked and concerned now felt something else entirely. They weren't just witnessing a group of soldiers. They were witnessing a tradition of honor, duty, and unbreakable discipline. And in that moment, they understood why the Royal Guards are respected around the world. Because even when one of their own falls, the duty continues. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Private James Turner lay motionless on the ground, his body still clad in the iconic scarlet tunic and bearskin hat. People expected chaos. They expected someone to rush to his aid, a fellow guard, a concerned officer, perhaps even a medic from the palace. But instead, the other royal guards did not move. Not even an inch. They remained locked in their rigid positions, staring straight ahead, as if nothing had happened. To the untrained eye, it looked heartless, even robotic. But this was not a lack of empathy, it was discipline in its purest form. The Royal Guards were not allowed to break formation, no matter what happened. It was a rule that had been followed for centuries. They knew help was coming. And their job? To hold their ground, to represent the unwavering strength of the British monarchy, even in the face of unexpected events. But then, amid the frozen formation, a single royal guard finally moved. With calculated precision, he took one step forward, then another. His movements were measured, controlled, precise. This was the moment the crowd had been waiting for. The guard reached James' side, bending down in a movement so smooth that it barely broke the rhythm of the ceremony. Even in an emergency, the British Army's discipline never faltered. The crowd held their breath. Would they lift him up? Would they try to wake him? Then, two more guards joined in, stepping forward in perfect synchrony. Without any frantic motion, They effortlessly lifted James' unconscious body off the ground, ensuring that his rifle and uniform remained untouched. Everything was controlled. Every motion was choreographed. And as they carried him away, the remaining royal guards stood as firm as statues, their focus never wavering. For those watching, it was one of the most impressive displays of discipline they had ever seen. Beyond the palace gates, a specialized medical team was already on standby. Fainting incidents among the royal guards were rare, but not unheard of, especially on days as brutally hot as this one. The team moved swiftly, their boots crunching against the pavement as they approached the fallen soldier. James had been carried to the side, away from the ceremony, yet still in sight of curious onlookers. The medics worked quickly. One of them carefully removed his bearskin hat, revealing his soaked hair, his forehead drenched in sweat. Another checked his pulse, pressing fingers against his wrist, while a third tilted his chin up, ensuring he could breathe properly. Slowly, James began to stir. His eyelids fluttered, his breathing deepened, and after a long moment, his eyes finally opened. For a second, everything was a blur. The brightness of the sun, the murmuring voices, the sharp contrast between the red of his uniform and the crisp white of the medic's gloves. Then reality hit him. He had collapsed. In front of hundreds of people. His first instinct? To stand back up. To return to formation. He tried to push himself off the ground, but the medics gently held him down. "Easy, soldier," one of them said, his voice calm but firm. "You need to rest." But James' mind was racing. He had let his unit down. He had broken formation. He had failed. But what he didn't know yet was that the world saw it differently. As James sat on the ground, trying to steady his breathing, he could see his fellow guards still in perfect formation. The changing of the guard ceremony had continued without interruption. It was a testament to their discipline. One soldier had fallen, but the tradition had carried on seamlessly. James clenched his jaw. He wanted to be standing with them, to finish what he had started. The medic noticed his determined expression and sighed. "You're not going back out there today, soldier." James hesitated. But deep inside, he knew they were right. Still, he wasn't ready to leave. With gritted teeth, he forced himself onto one knee. The medics started to protest. "I just need a moment," James murmured. He slowly rose to his feet, unsteady but standing tall once again. The crowd, which had been watching anxiously, broke into soft applause. James' gaze remained fixed forward. Even though he was being taken away from medical attention, he refused to look weak. He walked, not stumbled. He held his chin high, not downcast. And as he was led back toward the palace, he could feel the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, not in pity, but in respect. He hadn't failed. He had given everything he had. And that was true dedication. By the time James had reached the palace infirmary, the internet was already buzzing with the footage. Videos of the moment had gone viral. Millions of people had already seen the clip of the royal guard collapsing, but more than that, they had seen how his fellow soldiers reacted. The headlines flooded in. Pushpin, a royal guard collapsed, but his fellow soldiers' reaction shocked the world. Pushpin, discipline and honor. The incredible moment a guard fainted at Buckingham Palace. Pushpin, a true soldier. The royal guard who refused to stay down. News stations played the footage on loop, with anchors and commentators praising the unwavering professionalism of the Royal Guards. Military officials, veterans, and former guards themselves weighed in, explaining how this level of discipline is what makes the British Army one of the most respected in the world. As for James, when he finally checked his phone, he was stunned. His name was everywhere. His face was on news articles, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and the comments? They weren't filled with mockery. They weren't filled with criticism. They were filled with respect. Pushpin, this guy gave everything he had. Total respect. Pushpin, the Royal Guards are built different. That's next-level dedication. Pushpin, even when he was carried away, he still looked like a soldier. And when James returned to duty a week later, something unexpected happened. As he took his position once more, a group of tourists standing nearby began clapping softly. James didn't react. He wasn't allowed to. But deep inside, he knew. They weren't clapping because he collapsed. They were clapping because he got back up.